5 signs your avoidant ex is missing you like crazy because of this. If you think your avoidant ex isn't feeling your absence, think again. Avoidants don't chase with words. They chase with patterns. And once you know what to look for, the signs they miss you become almost impossible to ignore. There's a myth that avoidant people don't feel, that they walk away cold, untouched, unfazed, but the truth is completely different. Avoidants feel deeply. They just protect those feelings fiercely. And when they start missing you, they won't send paragraphs or confessions. They'll show it in subtle human cracks in their armor. Today, I'm going to show you the 5 clearest signs your avoidant ex is thinking about you far more than they'd ever admit. Not because you chased them, but because your absence created the space for their real emotions to surface. When an avoidant ex reappears in your life with a message that seems casual, harmless, or purely practical, it's rarely as innocent as it looks. People with avoidant tendencies are masters at masking their real emotions, especially attachment and longing. Their instinct is to protect themselves from vulnerability at all costs, which means they'll never show up saying, "I've been thinking about you," even when that's exactly what's been happening. Instead, they choose the safest doorway back into your life, one that allows them to reconnect without admitting they want to reconnect. This is why their first message after distance almost always comes wrapped in convenience. Maybe they ask about something trivial, like the name of a restaurant you once tried together, or they bring up a random task you helped them with months ago. They might claim they're reaching out because they needed information, or because something popped into their head, or because they just found your hoodie in the closet. On the surface, it reads as logistical. Underneath, it's emotional reconnaissance. They're testing the water to see if you still care, if you'll respond warmly, if the door back to you is still cracked open. The interesting part is that avoidants don't reach out unless something internal is shifting. They don't do unnecessary emotional labor. So if they're messaging you, even with a 3-word, no context, "Hey, how have you been?" it's because the silence has started to echo on their side. Avoidants often don't feel the loss immediately after a breakup. They feel relief first. Relief from pressure, relief from expectations, relief from emotional closeness that overwhelmed them. But once that relief fades, something they never expect takes its place, the space to finally miss you. That's when the casual messages begin. Their outreach also tends to have a subtle awkwardness to it, the kind of stiffness that happens when someone is trying to seem relaxed while hiding their deeper motive. The tone isn't smooth, it's controlled. It's often short, oddly neutral, even robotic. But that neutrality is the tell. Someone who truly doesn't care, someone who has moved on, doesn't need to craft an emotionally safe version of contact. They simply don't reach out at all. A message that tries hard not to seem meaningful is almost always the opposite. Another clue is timing. Avoidant exes reach out at moments when something in their life stirs old feelings. Maybe they saw a movie you used to watch together, passed a place you visited, or stumbled across something that triggered a stored emotional memory. Avoidants are incredibly sensitive to emotional reminders, even though they rarely express it directly. So instead of saying, "I thought of you today," they show up with a message that hints at connection without naming it. Even the way they frame the conversation is revealing. They'll pretend to be breezy, but they'll respond quickly. They might not ask deep questions, but they'll linger. They won't flirt, but they'll keep the interaction alive longer than necessary. Every small extension of the conversation is an attempt to maintain the emotional thread without admitting they're holding onto it. This casual contact that isn't actually casual is often the very first sign their emotional wall has a crack in. They won't say they miss you, but their behavior quietly does the talking for them. When an avoidant ex begins quietly watching you from a distance, it's one of the most revealing signs they're missing you far more than they're comfortable admitting. Avoidants are deeply protective of their emotional world, so when feelings start resurfacing, they rarely come forward directly. Instead, they choose a form of connection that doesn't require vulnerability, digital proximity. It allows them to stay close without being seen, to observe your life without participating in it, and to feel connected without risking the emotional exposure that terrifies them. One of the clearest examples of this is when they regularly view your social media stories or posts. especially if they are among the first to watch. Avoidants use this as a way to check in without having to reach out. It satisfies their curiosity and soothes the part of them that wonders how you're doing, who you're with, whether you've moved on, or whether you still seem like the person they knew. They'll claim they're just scrolling, but the consistency gives them away. You don't quietly orbit someone's online presence unless there's still an emotional pull. They may also hover around your digital space in ways that seem subtle but intentional. Maybe they like an old photo, not one of the fresh recent ones, as if they got lost scrolling down memory lane. Or they might refollow you after having unfollowed, which is a classic avoidant move. Disconnect in the heat of emotion, then circle back once the intensity fades and the missing sets in. They may even follow one of your friends or engage with the people closest to you. It's not always conscious, but it's driven by a desire to remain connected to your world. Avoidants do this because distance feels safer than direct communication. Emotional closeness triggers their internal alarm system, but emotional distance creates just enough space for their longing to breathe. Watching you online becomes a way for them to feel the bond without having to handle the responsibilities or vulnerabilities that come with interacting. In their mind, it's a controlled form of closeness. They get to decide when and how they see you without risking a conversation they're not ready for. This kind of digital watching also shows up in unexpected ways, like staying in group chats they no longer participate in, keeping your photos in an album they never deleted, or leaving their read receipts on when they look at your messages. Avoidants rarely purge emotional history. They avoid intense emotional processing just as much as they avoid intense emotional connection. So instead of deleting reminders of you, they quietly keep them. Their digital behavior becomes a window into the feelings they're not yet able to express. What's even more telling is the pattern. The more you pull back, the more they watch. Not because they want control, but because your absence makes them feel the loss more sharply. When you're not in their inbox, when you're not reaching out, when you're no longer predictable, they feel the shift. Avoidants don't respond to pressure, but they react strongly to space. And their silent online presence often increases right at the moment you stop chasing. To someone who isn't paying attention, this behavior looks passive. But to anyone who understands avoidant detachment, it's incredibly active. This is how avoidants reconnect emotionally, indirectly, quietly, and from the shadows. They may not send you a message, but their eyes are still on you. And that says everything they won't say aloud. When an avoidant X begins expressing emotions indirectly through unrelated topics or seemingly random frustrations, it's one of the clearest signs. You're still affecting them. Avoidants rarely talk openly about missing someone because doing so feels too vulnerable, too intimate, too exposing. Instead, their feelings leak out sideways. They might mention being stressed, overwhelmed, tired, or confused, but it's not really about work, life, or obligations. It's about the emotional shift happening inside them now that you're no longer their safety net. Avoidants experience emotions in a delayed way. While more securely attached people feel the breakup immediately, avoidants often feel relief first. They tell themselves they have freedom again, no pressure, no expectations. But later, when the dust settles and the silence becomes real, feelings start creeping in through the back door. Since they're not skilled at recognizing or naming these internal changes, the emotions come out in the form of general irritability or vague sadness. So when they reach out to you and say something like, "I don't know, things just feel off lately," it's rarely about life. It's about the emotional vacancy your absence created. What's interesting is that avoidants don't even realize they're doing this half the time. They think they're just venting or updating you, but their subconscious is saying, "I feel something and I don't know how to handle it." They'll mention things like feeling disconnected from people, or lacking motivation, or feeling strangely nostalgic. These are emotional signals pointing to the fact that the person they felt the most connection with, you, isn't present in their world anymore. And since they can't articulate that directly, they express it through safe, surface-level topics that still give them emotional relief. You'll notice that these emotional leaks tend to show up unexpectedly and often at odd moments. Avoidants won't break down during a deep conversation. That would feel too exposed. Instead, I'll let something slip in the middle of a casual check-in or a random text thread. They might say they're not sleeping well, or that they're feeling overwhelmed for no specific reason. They may sound unusually sensitive, a little softer, even apologetic. Their tone shifts. Their words are less guarded. These moments are rare cracks in their emotional armor, and they reveal far more than they intend. Another subtle sign is when they begin reminiscing about times in their life unrelated to you, but still emotionally charged. Things like a rough childhood memory, a past friendship, or a difficult season in their career. This is often a roundabout way of opening the emotional door without directly acknowledging the feelings tied to your relationship. They're looking for emotional grounding, and since you once felt safe to them, they drift back towards you when their internal world feels unstable. Even the fact that they're sharing anything emotional at all is significant. Avoidants don't seek emotional exchanges unless something inside them is pulling strongly. They don't reach out for comfort from people they're done with. They don't open up when they feel indifferent. So when they start talking about their stress, their confusion, their mood changes, or their emotional discomfort, it's rarely about the topic itself. It's a disguised attempt to reconnect with the emotional bond they once had with you. Their feelings come out clumsily, sideways, and indirectly, but they still come out when an avoidant ex starts bringing up inside jokes or shared memories. It's rarely accidental. People with avoidant tendencies don't casually revisit the past unless something in that memory still holds emotional weight for them. They feel nostalgia deeply but cautiously because reminiscing brings them closer to a connection they've spent time distancing themselves from. So when they menti on something only the two of you would understand, a silly joke, a night you spent laughing, a place that became yours, or some small ritual that existed only in the world you two created, it's a disguised form of emotional longing. Avoidants often struggle to express sentiments directly. Saying I miss you would feel too vulnerable, too revealing, too risky. But saying remember that weird cafe that burned the toast every time feels safe. It's emotional intimacy wrapped in humor. It's longing dressed up as casual conversation. Inside jokes are powerful because they belong exclusively to you and them. No one else gets them. No one else can fully participate. So by referencing them, your avoidant ex is intentionally stepping back into a shared emotional space they told themselves they needed to leave. What makes this behavior especially meaningful is that avoidants avoid emotional triggers that feel too intense or painful. They usually steer clear of anything that might stir deep feelings, unless those feelings have become too strong to ignore. When they're missing you, the little memories start resurfacing. They think of how you used to laugh, the way you reacted to certain things, the warmth you brought into everyday moments. And because they don't know how to express this directly, they reach for a familiar memory instead. It's their attempt to reconnect without explicitly asking for closeness. You'll notice that these memory-based messages often appear out of nowhere. You might not have spoken in days or weeks, and suddenly they send a voice note imitating an old joke you used to share, or they text about a random moment, something no one else would care about. Avoidants rely on this because it gives them deniability. If you don't respond the way they hoped, they can pretend it was just a funny thought that crossed their mind. But if you engage warmly, they feel reassured without ever having to expose the vulnerable truth behind the message. Even the way they describe these memories can be telling. Their tone might sound softer, warmer, or more sentimental than usual. They may linger on the moment a little longer than necessary, expanding the conversation more than they normally would. Sometimes they over-explain the memory as if they're reliving it while typing. Other times they mention a memory but don't elaborate because the feeling attached to it is so vivid they don't need to say more. It's a quiet, emotional slip that reveals just how much they've been thinking. Bringing up the past is your avoidant ex's way of bridging the emotional distance they created. It's a method of reconnecting while still maintaining the protective barrier they rely on. Inside jokes and shared memories are emotional shortcuts. They instantly rebuild closeness without forcing them into an uncomfortable conversation. And when an avoidant is missing you, they find themselves drawn back to these little moments, using them as a safe doorway to feel near you again without ever having to admit why. When an avoidant ex suddenly becomes more attentive, responsive, or present right at the moment you pull your energy back, it's not a coincidence. It's a deeply rooted emotional pattern. Avoidants don't respond well to pressure or pursuit. It activates their instinct to protect themselves and retreat. But when you stop chasing, stop checking in, and stop trying to hold the connection together, something shifts inside them. The very space you create becomes the environment where their suppressed feelings finally start to surface. Avoidants often need distance to feel desire. When someone is too close, they feel overwhelmed. When someone pulls away, they feel the loss. This paradox is central to how they function emotionally. So when you detach, not to manipulate them, but because you're genuinely reclaiming your own peace, they suddenly find themselves sensing the absence of your energy. You're no longer the constant emotional presence they took for granted. You're no longer the reassurance they assumed would always be available. The quiet becomes noticeable, then uncomfortable, and eventually impossible for them to ignore. What usually happens next is subtle. They start checking your social media more. They become more aware of what you're doing, who you're with, and how you're moving through life without them. If you used to reach out first and now you don't, they feel the imbalance. It's the first time they're forced to confront the reality that the connection isn't being kept alive by you anymore. And avoidants don't like losing a bond. They just don't know how to manage it when it feels too close. So when it begins to slip away, they act. Their behavior may show up through increased contact. Maybe they text again after weeks of silence, or they reply faster than usual, or they ask questions they didn't bother asking before. They might initiate conversations they previously avoided or follow up more often than they ever did during the relationship. Suddenly, they're curious. Suddenly, they're present. Suddenly, they notice things they once overlooked. This isn't random. It's a response to the emotional shift created when you stopped putting all your energy into maintaining the connection. Another sign is that they become more sensitive to your tone or your level of engagement. If your replies are shorter, they pick up on it. If you seem more distant, they subtly try to pull you closer. Avoidants don't like being chased, but they fear being forgotten. So when your behavior suggests you're moving on, they feel an internal tug, not necessarily toward commitment, but toward reconnection. That tug is the emote. Ional space where missing you begins to grow. They might also mirror your distance in an attempt to maintain control, but their silence feels different. It's restless. They stay quiet, but they watch closely. They hold back, but they're thinking more than ever. They pretend they're fine, but they're not detached the way they were before. Your shift disrupts their emotional equilibrium, and they're not as unaffected as they appear. When you stop chasing, you stop feeding the dynamic that kept their avoidant patterns comfortable. Suddenly, they have to confront their own feelings without the buffer of your energy. This is often when avoidants begin to realize they miss the connection. Not because you demanded anything, but because you finally gave them something they couldn't have while you were pursuing them, space to feel the truth. At the end of the day, the signs your avoidant ex is missing you aren't dramatic. They're subtle, quiet, almost whispered between the lines. Avoidants don't chase with words. They reveal themselves through patterns. And when those patterns shift, when they start reaching out casually, watching you from a distance, letting their emotions slip through the cracks, revisiting memories, or reacting to your newfound space, that's when you know your absence is being felt. But the most important part of this isn't about decoding them. It's about recognizing your value, your energy, your presence. The truth is, people miss what is meaningful, and they miss what they can no longer take for granted. When you step back into your own power, you become more magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you're choosing yourself. If your avoidant ex is missing you, it's not because you chased harder. It's because you stopped. You created the space for clarity, both for them and for yourself. And whether this leads to reconciliation or simply a deeper understanding of your worth, remember this, you are more than someone's hesitation. You're someone's discovery, someone's growth, someone's loss if they don't rise to meet you. Thank you for spending this time with me, for listening, for learning, and for choosing to show up for yourself today. Take what resonates, let go of what doesn't, and keep moving forward with the confidence that you deserve a love that doesn't pull away the moment it feels real. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.